This podcast could potentially have adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly the possibility of sexual content. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Drinking with Authors. I'm your host, Erica Lance. Today, we have a special kind of event and a demon cat in the background. But the special event is we have multiple people on. Very, very cool. So welcome, Robert Crane and Teresa Griffin Kennedy. Woo,
Hi,
to Drinking
cheers.
with Authors. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Cheers.
Cheers. Okay, let's talk
Cheers.
about what we're drinking for a moment. I have discovered and I'm kind of in love with this thing called Nixie, which is a sparkling water. Apparently it's organic, which I think water should be, but whatever. This one is watermelon mint, but I put gin in it because that's what I do. Anyway, I'm enjoying this immensely. Robert, what are you drinking there?
I am drinking Kettle One on the rocks
Ooh,
in a Glenlivet glass. I don't know if you
wow.
can see that.
Oh, multi-drinks. I like it.
I don't know if you can read that or not. It says the Glenlivet.
I
Yeah,
can kind of read it, but I trust you. I trust you in your glasses. Teresa, what are you drinking with us?
I have my container here with my Vanport container. It's a business in Portland. I'm drinking a mimosa with ice cubes.
Mimosa with ice cubes.
I don't drink very often.
I'm not even
But-
sure how that would. Okay, I'm going to trust you on that because I
I
like
like
what
it a little diluted.
I can understand that. She's like, I can't get too drunk in the first 15 minutes. That would be bad.
I'm a total lightweight.
That's okay. I have a couple of, one of my co-hosts is allergic to alcohol, so she normally drinks tea. Shout out to JM. Okay, so you guys wanted to come on. There is actually technically three of you. There's one here in spirit, right?
Yes.
And his name is Joe Coyle.
Yes.
Joe Coyle. So tell me about the three of you, the tripod of epicness. Explain.
Do you want to start, Bob?
Yeah, I'll start. No, I had the pleasure of meeting Teresa on the internet, where I guess a lot of people meet nowadays, and we started sharing. Yeah, I saw the stuff she was writing, and she goes across the board. She writes fiction, nonfiction, reportage, poetry, memoir, everything. I was reading some of her stuff and I went, wow, this is really cool. Then I sent her a story that I pulled out of the cardboard box and she read it. And because Teresa has her own publishing company, Oregon Greystone Press, she puts together, different books and different subjects and genres. And we started talking about doing a short story book together.
Oh,
And here it is. Oops, there it is. And it happens to feature a photograph, cover photograph, I don't know if you can see it,
yeah.
by Joe Coyle, the aforementioned Joe Coyle, who's not with us today. But Teresa and I traded stories. We liked what we were reading. And we said, let's expand this into more people. And go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, Bob actually was able to connect with so many wonderful people, and Joe Coyle was just one of them. He's an actor, and I Googled him. I did research, and he's an amazing actor. He's been in some really important films. He's a character actor. He's worked with everyone, Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, all the major stars. And he's a really great actor, but he's also a writer. And so Bob got me in touch with him. And really, Bob was the backbone of this entire project because of the people he knows and his old friends. And we got really amazing blurbs for the book. But I wanted to put together an anthology. And so I did a shout out here in Portland and didn't get any responses, which is typical. Portland is a really small town. And
really?
and Bob and I were friends on Facebook and had been chatting, and he said, I have this short story, would you like to read it? And I said, sure. And so he mailed it, and I actually have the original over here in my file cabinet. It's yellowed. It's probably 25 or 30 years old. And it's an amazing story because when you read between the lines, you see Bob's history in the story. And that's what made it so special. So this was a really demanding project because it was my first anthology. I had some issues with the graphic designer who had some health problems. And so there was a lot of touch and go, and it was very, very stressful. I learned a lot from it though, but Bob was the backbone of the entire project.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
Yeah.
yeah.
You
and
made
I was
it
the
go.
editor.
Yeah, you made it. Yeah, you can. I don't know if you can read this, but it says edited by. Can you read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what started this entire anthology project? Like, what was the genesis idea? What was, we're going to sit down and write about this. I have a publishing company as well, and we put out anthology calls every year, really to give new authors a chance to get published, because we all know it's exciting when you get a story and you're published. You're like,
Oh, yeah.
woo! I mean, it's great when it's a book, but if it's a short story, you're like, I'm published.
Mhm.
But and I know how we come up with some of the ideas, mainly because of things that we find funny. Like, I did an anthology called Super Useless, and I had everybody write stories about useless superpowers that people had.
That's great. That's a great idea.
Yeah. But what was the genesis of this anthology?
For me, it was, I just wanted to do an anthology because they're so popular in Portland. And I have always enjoyed working with other writers, and I just wanted to create an anthology, and I had wanted to call it by the title of my short story, my long short story, which is in the book, and that's called Squirrely Conversation Outside Bishop's House. So that was the original title. It was going to be my short story. So, I was the one doing it. So I decided that would be the title. And we talked about the title later, and Joe and Bob came up with some really great suggestions. And I realized, I've always known how important it is to collaborate. So I wanted everyone who was involved to know this was a collaboration. We were going to all work together. I wasn't going to be, the end. I wasn't going to be bossy or anything like that, as some editors can be. And I wanted it to be more like a collaboration. But
she is a taskmaster. She is a taskmaster.
As one taskmaster to another, I appreciate that greatly.
Oh yeah.
Because I think authors need that. You need somebody to be like, hey, get this done, because otherwise we're great at loitering around as authors. We're like, we're gonna go do this thing over here, have a sandwich, and watch Netflix, and not do anything we're supposed to be doing.
I feel like I'm a really good editor, but I have certain rules for myself. Never rush anything, and don't rush other writers, because when you rush, that's when mistakes happen. And really the biggest challenge of this anthology was the graphic designer had some health issues. And so he wasn't able to do his best. And so I had to get another graphic designer to finish the project. And once I did that, it was smooth sailing. That's the frustrating part for me as a publisher and an editor. I can do everything else except graphic design, and that's the most expensive part of publishing, because it's between $3,000 and $5,000 for a book. And that's the most frustrating part for me, is it's always coming up with that money to pay the graphic designer, because I can do all the other stuff,
Yeah. And the thing that sold me on Teresa, I mean, I mentioned to you about all the styles that she writes in, and they're all excellent. I've seen across the board, and some of the other books that she's done for her company. Here's what sold me: she writes sex really well, really well. Oh man, I was sitting here reading these short stories, and there's some sexual content within the story. I'm going, this is not embarrassing. This is really, really good. And that sold Teresa for me. I said, yeah, I want to work with this woman. Man, she's good.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. And
Yeah.
I love the giggling. The giggling is absolutely making this, and the lovely shade of red you're turning that is matching your lipstick. I do enjoy that as well. I say that only because one of my partners in crime is an erotica writer as well. So am I. And what it's interesting is not everybody can write sex, and not
No.
everybody can write sex well,
No,
Exactly.
no.
So yeah, there's a Kindle unlimited plethora of badly written sex.
Oh, God.
And then there's 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
And there's
Oh.
also the Bad Sex Award in England, which is very famous
Yeah.
for authors that write particularly bad sexual, content. Yeah.
I didn't know there was a Bad Sex Award. I'm gonna look this up.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's really funny.
Teresa, do you remember one offhand? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you remember one of the really bad sex awards?
Oh gosh, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I was writing an essay called "Sex Writing in Literature" because I started doing research, and because I was thinking about writing a book about sex, which is basically my 2021 first novel, Talionic Night in Portland, a love story. And so I was doing research, and I came across all these articles that were written by men saying that women couldn't write sexual content. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
So I got really incensed, and I spent about a year writing this essay, Sex Writing in Literature. And I still have it. It's on my Medium or my Substack page. And I found this award, the Bad Sex Award. And they were using these mostly English writers to really kind of put on the spot and humiliate. And it made me really angry, but I can't remember a specific one.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just, if you could remember. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, comparing women's genitalia to oysters and things like that. I think Marquis de Sade was mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, there is an amazingly funny podcast. I think they're wrapping their final season, or they just did, called "My Dad Wrote a Porno." And
Wow.
it's an English guy whose retired father wrote a pornographic novel.
Wow.
And it is terrible. And the podcast is him reading this novel. Like, he reads a chapter, a podcast with friends of his, right? He reads the book aloud to two friends of his. And like, one of the first things his dad compares women's breasts to is pomegranates. They were like two dangling pomegranates.
Oh, God.
Just for the record, no woman wants her breasts compared to dangling pomegranates. And it's said in a way that's supposed to be alluring, but it is, if you ever get a chance to listen, it is one of the most hysterical, because his dad put this book up on Amazon by himself, posted it there. And they started doing this podcast, and of course the book started selling like crazy, because everybody's like, what the hell is this book, right?
Yeah.
And so his dad continued to write them.
Oh.
He didn't get any better, because his dad doesn't get that they're kind of making fun of him. And they're not doing it in a mean way, but it's just like comparing women's genitalia to oysters.
I do remember one section of this article on the Bad Sex Award, and one of the authors was a man author from England, and he had written a passage comparing this male character's sexual prowess to being that of a jackhammer. He was a jackhammer, and that's another one. Never compare sex. Use the word jackhammer to, it's terrible.
Yeah. My dad didn't write pornos. He just filmed them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
your dad was fantastic.
He videotaped them. Yeah.
Mr. Crane, who was your father?
My dad was the late Hogan's Heroes star, Bob Crane.
Oh, wow.
I grew up watching, had a huge crush on. He was the quintessential cool guy, handsome, funny, smart. Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yes, no, crushing.
Wow. He was a great guy. He should not have been married. He was married twice. But back in the 60s and 70s, long before most of your audience was born, there was the videotape explosion.
Oh, what pray tell is a videotape, Robert? You got to.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I know. See, you're too young for this.
No, I'm 1973, my friend. 1973. I remember videos. I remember the great VHS beta tape war.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I
Sure.
remember that. The absolute wrong product won that one.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so everybody got a home video unit because it was instantaneous. You could do whatever you want and watch it back immediately. So, you know, some people took it to the next step, including my father, and videotaped sexual encounters and, you know, women who wanted to pose in front of the camera so they could watch it back instantly. And, you know, it was like a moving Polaroid. For anybody who remembers Polaroids, they were still instantaneous images, but this was thousands of instantaneous images that you could watch back like that. So everybody was doing all sorts of, you know,
nefarious,
non-sexual and sexual things on video. And
well, I think that any product like that, people's first inclination is to go, how do we use this for sex?
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
Like, I feel like that's like the automatic thing. Like, well, how do we do that?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, but what got you into, we're going to take both your stories here, but Bob, what got you into writing? What made you decide to start writing?
Well, I admired my dad's drive, and you know, he was talented in certain areas. He was started on I'll make this short.
That's okay.
Started on the radio, and he was an incredible radio personality of the 50s and 60s in Connecticut, which is where I was born, and we moved to Los Angeles, and he was on the one of the major stations in Los Angeles. And then from there, he went into acting. And then the other highlight, of course, as far as I'm concerned, was Colonel Hogan, which my father was born to play. And he just had that, you know, like Teresa alluded to, the quick, sarcastic wit, good-looking guy. It just all came together. And of course, the rest of the cast and everything. And they, you know, such a bizarre idea at that time for Hogan's Heroes, but it all worked. And those were really the two highlights of his work as far as I was concerned.
So, and that caused you to want to do writing?
Oh, yeah, I totally forgot your question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's cheers.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what we
cheers.
do here.
You know, it's the kettle wine is already kicking in. No, yes, as I knew I was not an actor. I watched my dad do it. He was very comfortable and relaxed being in front of a camera. I knew that was not me. So what else do? You write about it. So I stayed behind the camera and started, I was very fortunate to, back in the days of magazines, hook up with magazines like OUI, which is owned by Playboy, Playboy magazine, and a bunch of others, Penthouse, and places that publish. They happen to have, I know, nude women in them, but they also publish articles and interviews, which is what I was interested in, getting information out of people in either an article or a Q&A. And that's how I started. I loved getting info out of people, like you're doing with us.
Yes. No, I think it's incredibly fun to do that.
Yeah.
So what transitioned you into writing books then?
Just to take it longer, like for instance, one of the people in our short story book. Here you go.
I like your shameless plugs. You're doing a good job with that.
Is Christopher Fryer, who I've worked with on 3 books. Bruce Dern, Jack Nicholson, and another shameless plug. I just happen to have these books, you know, close by. Crane. There we go.
Yeah. Great book.
And we worked together on those. And in the case of Bruce Dern, we interviewed him a couple of times for different magazines. And then we thought, well, he's got so many stories. This guy is just a treasure trove of Hollywood stories. Let's expand it. So we talked him into a book, and we came out with his autobiography a number of years ago. And just to take it longer, because there's so many stories in it with these people like Nicholson and what have you. I worked on a book with Tom Mankiewicz. He was part of the Mankiewicz family. His dad was Joe, the director, writer. And he has, again, just a treasure trove of stories. So I had interviewed him, and then we expanded Tom Mankiewicz into a book, and just to give more space for more stories. So that's how the books started.
Very cool. So then, Teresa, where does your journey begin, my friend?
I felt the inclination to write when I was 12. I always wanted to write. I was a reader. My father, my father was in World War II. He was 46 when I was born, so he was already a mature adult. And he was a reader. My mother was a reader. I was just constantly exposed to them reading, and so I became a reader. And I felt the inclination to start writing when I was 12, and I had a little diary. And of course, I'm the 7th of 9 Irish Catholic children.
Oh,
So
wow.
my sisters got into my diary and made comments, and that ended that. So when I finally left home when I was 18 and moved in with my first husband, that's when I really started to seriously write. And my father, who his name was Dorsey Griffin, he encouraged me to write. He was also a writer and an author. He wrote a couple of books on Oregon history. He wrote a few poems. And so he was always encouraging me from about the time I was 18 or 19 to write and to go to college, which eventually I did. But yeah, that's basically how it started for me.
So what was your first published work then, Teresa? What was the first for realsy published work?
My dad told me, number one, you have to have range. He always pressed that idea. And he told me, when you can, you need to create a website. So I created a website. I've been online since 2007. And I wrote and published letters to the editor with newspapers, personal essays, historical profiles, things like that on my website. But I didn't actually publish a book until 2016, when I co-authored a book called Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland, Sex, Vice, and Misdeeds in Mayor Baker's Reign. Really
easy for you to say.
I was like, that is a mouthful.
It's ridiculous.
I am a ridiculous mouthful of a title, but it sounds cool.
Yeah. Well, it was all right. It could have been better. I co-authored it with my dear friend J.D. Chandler, who passed away about 2 years ago at the age of 60. He didn't take care of himself, and I'm still mad at him. But we co-authored it together, and I wanted to go over it a couple more times, and he didn't. We had to keep the deadline. Deadline's always so important to him, and it's an okay book. It could have been better, but that was the first book. And then later that year, I published my first solo book, which was my book of poetry, which is called Blue Reverie and Smoke. And I was able to get a man named Dan Raphael to write the foreword. And Dan Raphael is a really, really prominent poet in Portland, Oregon. Anyone who's in the poetry scene knows who Dan is. So I asked him if he would look at it, and he said, well, I can't promise you anything. I'll have to read it first. And I sent it to him, and he read it, and he loved it, and he wrote a really wonderful foreword for the book. And then after that, I wrote my book of short stories in 2018, which was Burnside Field Lizard and Selected Stories. And that was selected as a finalist for the Next Generation Indie Book Award 2019. And then in 2021, I published my first novel, 2021, and that's called Taylanic Night in Portland, A Love Story. And that was longlisted with the Clue Award and the Somerset Award. It didn't win anything, but being longlisted in 2 national book awards is okay.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing.
And then in 2022, we published the anthology, Beyond Where the Buses Run Stories, through Oregon Greystone Press. And then I was also, I had a book published through the History Press again, The Lost Restaurants of Portland, Oregon. And that's done pretty well. I'm not writing for them anymore because they don't pay authors enough. They pay authors 9%, and I'm not going to waste my time. But I am working on a second restaurant book that I might finish in the next year to 18 months, and I will be publishing that through Oregon Greystone Press because I want more than 9%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting you bring that up, because I have to say, with 9%, History Press is one of the large imprints because they do publish a lot. I have a friend that writes with them.
Yeah.
And he writes Erie, Florida, and Freaky Florida. He's actually one of my co-hosts too. But they pay a lot more than some of the other big ones do.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you.
That's always interesting. But that seems like a very interesting journey, starting from 12 years old to getting into. Do you think COVID had anything to do with your books actually getting done? I'm just asking because a lot of people managed to get stuff done during sort of the COVID time period.
I know. And I think that some of those people are people that aren't really longtime writers. They're the kind of people that, well, I've always wanted to write this book. I'll do it because COVID's here, because I was being published before COVID and after COVID. But COVID made things harder because I was finishing the restaurant book during that time, and it definitely made things harder. But yeah, I don't know.
What made you get into publishing?
Well, my husband, Don Dupay, is a retired police detective with the Portland Police Bureau, and he wrote his memoir, which is called Behind the Badge in River City, a Portland Police Memoir. He wrote that in 1991 and 1992, about 235 pages of typed content. And when we got together and we became friends, and later we became closer.
We're going to use quotations. It's fine. We're all getting the intimation. Continue.
Yeah, he brought out the manuscript that he had typed. It was in a box, old school, and I looked at it, and he's a prolific writer, and he had written a novelized account of the life of a pedophile called Touched, and he wanted me to focus on that. And when I saw both of the manuscripts together, I knew that the police memoir was the golden egg. So I said, we really need to focus on this, and it wasn't publishable at the time. It was a really good long kind of outline, but it needed to be fleshed out a lot. It needed a lot of editing. So we worked on it for 2.5 years. And then in 2015, when it was finished, we started submitting it. And we knew that it wasn't going to be received well, because he's basically sharing all of this information about police corruption with the Portland Police Bureau and the things he experienced. He was on from 1961 to 1978 when he resigned because the job was really killing him. So I knew that it wasn't going to be easy to be published. We sent it around. We got the usual rejections. There's a press with Portland State University. I can't remember what they're called, but they looked at it for a while, and then they passed. They looked at it for about 3 months, and we were emailing back and forth, and they finally passed too because it's too controversial. They didn't want to get involved. And so we realized really the only way we were going to see this book come out is if we published it ourselves. So we got in touch with a woman named Patricia Marshall. She runs Luminaire Press, and she taught me a lot. And she said, you don't want to self-publish. She said, you want to create a name. And I came up with Oregon Greystone Press. And she helped us publish the book, and that was really how it started. And he published his second book, which was a novel in 2019 called Frank's Revenge, Albina After Dark, which is kind of a novelized account of various things he saw. But it's also, it's a novel, it's fiction. And he's in the process of, we're in the process of publishing his third book, which is called The Tainted Rose, stories from a Portland detective, also nonfiction. So yeah, Dawn and I decided that we would take William Randolph Hearst's advice when he said, if you own the newspaper, you can write what you want. So
Yeah,
we're like, okay, we need to take the bull by the horn, you know?
yeah.
Oh my God, I like that. I love that you said that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've written this anthology. Let's talk about gathering all the authors to do this, because we actually haven't on the show talked a lot about getting together a bunch of people to do something at the same time, because it's hard enough trying to get yourself to do something at the same time, but other humans, right? So how did you solicit the stories?
Well, it helped that Bob knows everyone. Bob was really the one that was able to get all the great writers, and yeah, it just worked out so well, you know.
Well, the easiest part was Teresa and me working together. Then once we got other people involved, it becomes, complicated. But I think my opinion is, I think we got some really good and varied styles out there. The aforementioned Chris Fryer, the aforementioned Joe Coyle. Then there was a woman named Kari Hildebrand, and I found these in a box, and I sent them to Teresa, and I said, use any of them, use none of them, whatever you want to do. And she liked 4 of them because they're really short, so they became kind of buffers between the longer pieces for the book. Because you have Teresa's got 2 stories, and so we have to space those out so they weren't just back to back. And so the way it worked out, I thought was kind of good with buffering and different styles and like that.
Yeah, Kari Hildebrand's stories were really just very good, very original, very, very touching, very sweet. I really enjoyed them, and so I think you did send me 4, and I think I used all of them.
I think so. Yeah.
3 of them are shorter, and then one of them is a longer short story she wrote. But and then Christopher Fryer's story is the first story in the book, Hunting License. It's amazing. He's such a great writer. It's really, really good. And then Joe Coyle's story is it was a very interesting story, and I had to read it a couple of times.
I'm still reading it.
Yeah, it's very mysterious and really makes you think. Because he's a great writer, and then of course Bob's story, Wingding, a wonderful story, very long short story, and just a wonderful story that a lot of the best critics who provided blurbs were able to read and really see things in between the lines, and it's just a wonderful story.
So that has to be interesting, being an editor. When did you start editing, Teresa?
Well, my father goes back to my dad. He told me when I was 18, Teresa, I think you could be a writer. And we talked about it. He said, you have to start keeping a journal every day. You have to write every day just about what's going on in your life. And I did that for 15 years before I finally went into college when I was 35 and completed my college education. But he told me, he gave me so much good advice over the years. And I'm sorry, what was the question again?
I loved wherever you were going with that, but it was about when you started editing.
When I started editing, okay. I remember it well. When I started reading like an editor is when I realized I could edit. And that was probably about 15 years ago. I'd be reading a novel or a book and I'd think, that's dumb. I wouldn't have written it that way. And so I really actually started editing in 2015. Well, no, in 2013. When I started working on Dawn's memoir. We worked on that for 2.5 years. I had to kind of I was basically in charge of the whole project, and it was really demanding. We had to go over everything again and again, and it was hard for him because these were horrible memories, and he was oftentimes he would get upset and he'd have to take a break. That was when I started editing, and it's a good book. It's filled with mistakes. We did do a second edition in 2016, the following year, where I was able to correct some of the mistakes, and we were able to include an additional story and include additional photographs. But it's a quintessential first book. It's got the punctuation's crazy. That's on me. I'm still learning how to use apostrophes and commas, and but that was basically my first attempt at editing. But I've learned over the years how to edit well, and it just means going over things and doing a line by line edit 50 or 60 times. For example, my book, my novel, Taylanic Night in Portland, there were a couple people wanted to know who is your editor. It's so tight. Who is your editor? And I'm like, I'm the editor. Nobody edited that book. I did. You can do it. People say, oh, you can't edit your own work. You have to have a professional editor. Not if you're an editor. You can do it. I've read several books over the years written by authors who maybe only wrote 1 or 2 books, but they worked on it for 10 years. So by the time they're done with it, it's as clean and tight as it's ever going to be. And that's basically what I've learned about editing. You just have to go over it again and again and again, and hope that you were able to get a good graphic designer.
I think that's true, but I will say this. I think you're a little bit of an exception and not the rule. One is, I don't think anybody should take 10 years with their book. Must go faster. And yes. I've met many editors that can't edit their own work because I think it takes a certain mindset to be able to relook at your stuff. Even as a writer, going through it certain number of times, at least like for me, I start getting like, I'm not even seeing what's on the page anymore. Even if I do the different font and print it out and all the other stuff, I'm like, I have to sometimes just let it go because otherwise I over edit my work.
I that's exactly right, and I agree with you there. Because especially young people in their 20s and 30s that want to be famous, and they say, I've been writing for 6 years and I'm not famous yet. I haven't made $1 million, But yeah, it's true. And I also agree that most books shouldn't take more than about 3 years to write. That's generally how long it takes me. It took me 3 years to write my novel, about 3.5 years. It took me 3.5 years to write that restaurant book, which that was a nightmare. But yeah, it shouldn't take 10 years. But I do know of a couple writers in Portland that published their first book. One woman, I think she said she was working on hers for 12 years. So when she published it, it was really, really tight. And it's a charming book. It's very charming, but definitely not written the way I would write a book.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's, different people like to read different styles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that different, and that's why all different kinds of writers have different voices, which can be amazing.
Yeah. I love to read. I love to read everything. I think I've got about 1,200 books here at the house, and I love everything: nonfiction, fiction, poetry, biography. I just love to read all the time. If I don't read all the time, I get really nervous. I have a lot of nervous energy. But yeah, writing is just, for me, and I know that this is true for Bob too. It's just, I think we're both introverts, and it's just a way to express yourself. It's a way to get your feelings and thoughts out without killing someone.
Yeah, that's a good thing. You should probably not kill people. I've discovered that's frowned upon or illegal. I'm not sure which it is, but it's one of those two.
Yeah. But I have to write every day. I definitely have to write every day. And so.
Well, I think authors should write every day. I think even if it's for 10 minutes, you should sit down and write every day, because that's how you actually get work done, is by doing it. If you wait to have a perfect environment to write, then it's never a good thing.
I've done some of my best writing in chaos, with dogs barking and cats jumping on me and the phone ringing, and I need things like, I like to listen to classical music or jazz or blues. That helps a lot. Coffee helps, but not too much. Chocolate is nice.
Chocolate is a great motivator. I'm a big fan of the chocolate motivation. So let's talk about what's coming up for you guys. So, Bob, what is next up for you?
I'm working on a piece right now called My Unhollywood Family. My Unhollywood Family.
Okay.
And I focus on, I've had 4 parents. My 2 blood parents, a stepfather who just passed away, and a stepmother.
Okay.
And I'm still trying to make sense of this whole thing. I thought I knew, well, I won't speak for everybody, but I thought my parents were the rock. They know everything. They're my parents, Then they divorced, and we went, oh, okay, wait a minute. And as I said earlier, my dad should never have been married anyway. Then he married an actress who was on Hogan's, and they had a child together, and then he was killed, and it didn't last long. In the meantime, my mom married I love this. The Hollywood Reporter used to say, non-pro. You're a non. She married a non-pro. Like,
how dare she?
You're just a nothing. Like, you're just totally worthless. But my stepdad, Chuck, just a wonderful person, just died 95 years old. He stepped into a family. He had no children of his own from a previous marriage. He steps into a marriage situation with my mom. He picks up 3 kids immediately, me and 2 sisters.
Oh, wow.
He picks up an ex-husband who still talks to my mom. He picks up my dad's brother, who's still there, his mother, who is still there. He's got this whole collection of people now. We call him St. Charles. We call him Chuck, St. Charles, because he's a saint and put up with all of this. And now I'm trying to figure out this whole thing in my old age. Do we really ever know our parents? And if, when the divorce bomb went off, that shook our foundation. It was like, what? We were the first people on our block going through a divorce.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's embarrassing. It's, people look at you, well, what's wrong with these people? Oh, they're showbiz carny people, that's where they're from. And then we had my stepdad step in and hook up with my mom. And this guy was the total opposite of show business. He couldn't care less about show business. He and my mom would see a movie, and I'd go, Chuck, what did you guys see? I don't know, ask your mom. Who was in it? The only person he ever knew was Clint Eastwood. If it was any other actor or actress, ask your mother. I don't. And it was such a refreshing thing for our family, like this real non-show business person that we just loved him so much. Anyway, long story short, this is what I'm looking at now and writing about.
That sounds wonderful. I love that title. Yeah, that is a great title. I love that. Also, the child of divorce. I was 6 when my parents divorced in, I think, 1971 or 72. And I honestly thought it was my fault. I thought, because back then nobody talked to you. They didn't talk to me. They didn't sit me down, and they didn't talk to any of us and say, we just don't get along. All of a sudden my dad just left,
Oh, God.
So, yeah.
And how long did you carry that on your shoulders that it was your fault?
Oh gosh, probably for 6 or 7 years, and then I eventually, you grow up and you realize it's not my fault, but when it happened, I really did think it was my fault.
Yeah.
That I had done something. I'd been naughty, it must have been me.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm my parents divorced when I was really young too. So, I think it's very interesting also when you think of how family dynamics like that have changed. You know what I mean? And it sort of cyclically, it went from the 50s housewife sort of thing,
Yeah.
To you know, free love and all this stuff. And oh, wait, you don't have to get married forever. Like, I think it was a thing that you did have to get married forever,
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah,
you
and
did. And
if you didn't, it was like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, Teresa, what's next on the books for you, my friend?
Well, we're working right now to finish Dawn's third book, which is The Tainted Rose Stories from a Portland Detective. There's 4 stories. The first story is about some jewel thieves he arrested. The second story is about the troubled women of Albina. So women that he arrested, women that he had to deal with. He's very compassionate towards women. The third story is about his Black girlfriend who was murdered in 1980. Her name was Artent Thomas. She was really beautiful, and she was viciously murdered by an ex-boyfriend who found out she was engaged to a white man who used to be a cop. And so that's the third story. The fourth story is about how heroin came to Portland, Oregon. And so it's basically about his career. So that's the book we're working on right now. I just started writing a second book on restaurant history, which I am calling A Second Helping, Revisiting Portland's Lost Restaurants. So I figure that'll be done probably in a year and a half. And I also have a book that I'm almost finished with that I've been working on for about 5 years called We Learn to Live in the Castle Stories. And it's basically personal essays, memoir stories about my life from the time I was 2 years old and I was placed in a foster home for 5 months after my mother had a nervous breakdown to, just recently when my older sister Mary passed away a couple of years ago. So it's got 12 stories in it that span my life. So I've been working on that for about 5 years, and those are the next 2-3 projects.
Wow.
So you're not busy at all. Neither one of you
Yeah.
are busy. I see that. You guys should really get writing more. I'm just just throwing that out there.
And then in between, she throws out, nonfiction reporting stuff I see all the time on the internet. It's like, when did you have time to do this? Come on.
Well, I did just recently publish a long essay. I think it's 17,000 words, which I've been working on for a year and a half. It's basically about a notorious 1973 double homicide in Portland, Oregon of these 2 Black women. And they were murdered by a corrupt police officer who was also Black and a pimp and a drug dealer. And so I just published that about 5 days ago. I've been working on it for a year and a half, interviewing the family, looking up PPB personnel files, and that was a huge project. It was really hard. It was emotionally just really kind of taxing, and I'm so glad it's over with. I still may write a much shorter follow-up essay on it, but yeah, I try to put things out there on my Substack page when I can, especially if it's something short and political, because the politics in Portland are so messed up. And Portland is just such a different city now. It's not safe. I could go on.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, Bob is right. I do. See, that's the thing, I just have to be doing something like that or I get anxious.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with being productive. Like, people always say to me how fast I'm going all the time and doing stuff. And I always say, that's cool. I can rest when I'm dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't. Like, I'll have plenty of time. Okay. Well, go ahead.
When you think about it, all you really leave behind is your body of work.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
I tell people the thing that you get to make every day is memories.
Yeah.
Like, it's not stuff, it's memories. Let's go make some memories. Because I had somebody tell me a long time ago, it was actually an ex-boyfriend of mine had gone to visit his dad who was in a nursing home. And there was an older Black gentleman who had the room across the hall, and he'd see him sitting on like those little walker seats, like in the hallway watching people. And his dad was taken for a test, and he was talking to the guy, and the guy said to him, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically, make sure you're making memories every day, because it doesn't no matter how much money you have, when you're sitting in this chair later, the only riches you're going to have are the memories.
Yeah.
And, I've always felt that to be very true. So might as well create memories for you and memories for other people, because people read these works and you never know how they impact you, those people necessarily. Sometimes you get feedback, which is wonderful. But it's impacting people, even though you might not hear about it.
Yeah. I like reading dead authors and kind of following through their list of books or articles and see how they got to the last piece. It interests me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, shameless self-promotion time, my friends.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, no, you get to talk about where to find you on social media and your works. And I know, go ahead, hold them all up. I like that. So where do people find you, Mr. Crane?
Well, I have my wonderful author page, Robert David Crane, at Amazon. I'm also on Facebook, but there's about 18 other Robert Cranes. So I'm not sure how you find me.
How you find you by looking at your profile photo. It's a picture of your book.
Exactly. Yeah.
Crane,
right there. That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
I like that.
That's my shameless thing. Yeah.
I appreciate your shameless plug. Teresa?
You can get, I have an Amazon profile. So my books are all on Amazon, Teresa Griffin Kennedy. I have a Substack page. I have a Medium page. I'm on Facebook. I have 2 Instagram pages, and I'm on Twitter.
Wow.
It's a hassle.
I like it. I like it. Thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Erica. Thank you.
Absolutely. Guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. I've been your host, Erica Lance, no co-host today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave reviews, comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we will see you guys next time.